Hello everybody, welcome to an Arkham Horror the card game buying guide with me, Justin, from Playing Board Games, and I'm joined from Bryn and Travis, also from Playing Board Games, and we're here to help you understand what all the products are in Arkham Horror the card game, because if you're just starting, it can be a little bit overwhelming. In addition, we're going to break down some of these products in detail and then just give a little bit of summary on each of the other ones. But when you're first starting, these are all the different products that you can find to buy. So there's a core set, and some of you might be wondering, should I buy a second core set? We'll get to that when we get to the next little bit. There's also cycles, which are deluxe expansions. So I have here an example of the Dunwich Legacy. The cycle is the deluxe box and then 6 Mythos packs, which are like a playable scenario, 8 or so adventures depending on each cycle that give you both player cards and scenarios for you to play the game. When you're looking at purchasing cycles, there's a ton of choices to choose from. A good way to start is looking at what the current cycle being released is. So at the time of this video, it's the Innsmouth Conspiracy. Buying the actual cycle as it is released is the easiest way to keep up with the cycle, because things go out of print, but things will always come back into print. And I'm going to touch on that again in a few moments about a personal little pet peeve I have with some of the buying in this game. Investigator starter decks are just player cards, but they also give an Investigator. There are 5 of them released currently at the time of this video, and they are all listed there. They give a big bundle of player cards, and we're going to get to those into more detail as well. The 2 things we're not going to touch on in big detail here are the return to boxes and the standalone scenarios. So the return to boxes are a way for you to, they provide basically like an alternate version of a cycle. So there is the Return to the Night of the Zealot, alters the 3 scenarios in the core set of Arkham Horror, the card game. Return to the Dunwich Legacy.
The Return to ones are like the designers revisiting the cycles about 2 years after they come out and kind of fixing some of the design flaws or difficulty issues that the players have found with the game, but also just making them like a little bit tougher in general.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They also get to revisit some of the player cards that were underused out of the cycle and put out a new version of them that might be more widely played.
Yeah, and they also have a storage box, which are really nice.
That's what
is the real reason to get them.
Yes, yes, it is my reason for getting them. But when you're just starting out, we don't recommend starting with return to boxes. Even if you're going to buy a whole cycle and you're like, should I get the return to box? Or, for example, an Investigator starter deck. An Investigator starter deck will give you more value than just the return to box will.
It's also important to note that the return to boxes do not have the cycle in them. They only have the additional cards. You still need to own the Dunwich Legacy for your Return to Dunwich Legacy to work.
Yeah.
You cannot just buy the Return to Dunwich Legacy.
Mm-hmm. The last product type are the standalone scenarios, which are, most of them are really fun scenarios to play, but they only provide a scenario and they don't provide player cards. So when you're just starting, products that give you more player cards will give you more option for deck building, which will in turn give you more game, because you're going to be more likely to want to replay, for example, the Dunwich Legacy with new player cards. This isn't to say that standalone scenario is like a bad purchase, because they're good, fun scenarios, and some of them are nice and challenging, and some of them are really flavorful, and they're really good. But if you're just starting, you're going to want to focus on a cycle, and then after you get a cycle, maybe start jumping into the other things, the standalone scenarios.
The standalone scenarios are kind of the opposite of the starter decks. You get no player cards, you get a scenario, you get an entire scenario that can be played with or without anything else. So they're a good way to expand your collection, but they won't help you build different decks or anything like that.
Something that could be warranted, if, like, for example, you wanted to pick up a core set, like 3 or 4 of the starter decks, grabbing Murder at the Excelsior Hotel actually probably wouldn't be a bad purchase for starting out as well. Just because if you can't pick up a cycle or you don't have the money to buy a complete cycle. It's just something you could also consider. I would say that's actually probably like a good use of your Arkham money if you had a small budget for it. Now, I want to talk about cycles. Before we get into the core set, buying cycles. A lot of people say you have to play them in order. You don't have to play them in order. We played them in order because they came out that way. We've been playing since the original release of this game, and like playing them in order was fun, but it was our only way to play them. This makes it so that, for example, when something is out of print, like the Miskatonic Museum or the Phantom of Truth, the value of it gets inflated so much on the secondary market that it's like an absolute robbery. So buy the cycles that interest you as they are available. It's like not anyone who says it's necessary to play them in order is wrong. Because the only reason of playing them in order, the value, is that you see like the design of the game grow. But the majority of gamers out there, you won't care about seeing that process of it. You just want to play Arkham Horror, the card game. And the best way to do that is to just
appreciate that kind of design development.
Sorry, Travis?
So you probably won't appreciate that kind of design development.
Yeah, and even then, like, as someone who does appreciate the design development, I don't even really care that much about it. Like, the core of the game is so good that I'm okay with, I don't, like, the growth isn't that exciting to me because the core game of it is so well made. Now, let's get into some of the exciting stuff. So, a question you're probably asking when you buy this and you hear it a lot. On our own channel, we also do say this quite a bit. Is a second core set worth it? So a core set provides consistency to your deck building options, and while the purchase may not be for everyone, doing so will provide a benefit to your collection with second copies of certain cards. This includes Ward of Protection, Lucky, or other good cards Vicious Blow, stuff like that. What do you guys think? Travis, you had a great idea for when the recommendation of a second core set was worth it, and I agree completely that would be the time to look at it. So I'm going to pass this to you.
Yeah, I think that the optimal time to buy a second core set is after you have finished buying and playing your first cycle. So you got into the game with your first core set, you played through Night Out, you thought this game was pretty good, I want to buy some more. Next up, you buy Circle Undone, the Forgotten Age or whatever, and play the game, you have a lot of fun. You're like, man, this is great. But before you buy your second cycle, I would just pick up the second core set and fill in those cards, because they make your decks better, they make deck building more interesting, give you more options. There's a lot of really good cards in the core set that you're going to want 2 copies of, a lot of what's called staples, that they go into a lot of decks. And it allows you to play the game with more than 2 people.
Yes.
If you have like a set budget as well, like you could look at picking up the second core set and then 1 or 2 of the standalone scenarios, just to have a little bit more content to play, tide you over till you can get your second cycle. But like you really, really should get a second core set.
Yeah, it's also the Investigator starter decks were really smartly designed on Fantasy Flight's part in terms of making money, because the purple and the red decks, for example, don't have additional copies of Ward of Protection and Lucky, which we were saying in our reviews of them we would have loved to have, but like they make it so that still a second core set is still a very wanted purchase in this game. Bryn, what do you think?
Yeah, so I to me, even if the second core set brought nothing but Lucky, Vicious Blow, Ward of Protection, and 3rd and 4th copies of all of the colorless skills, I would still probably want it. A big part of what the second core set does is, like, if you're playing with 3 people, life's pretty tough without it. All of the colorless cards are going to be hotly contested, and you will not have enough copies for everyone to play. Yeah, like there's a lot of very strong level 0 cards in the core set.
Yeah, and I actually, when I was buying my collection, I pretty much did exactly what Travis recommended. I had bought the entire Dunwich Legacy, and then halfway through Carcosa, my purchasing through that, I bought my second core, and I honestly love it. But I think after you play the core and you're like exactly what Travis said, I think this was fun, I want to buy a cycle, and then after that cycle, if you're really into it, that would be the time. Like that's just like, yes, that's the PBG recommendation. I'm stamping on that. I'm with that 100%.
Like buying the second core set doesn't feel good really, but like it's worth it.
Yeah. And as you can see from our pros, as we said, the additional copies of cards will increase your consistency. Allows for 3+ players to play. Travis bought 2 copies from the beginning because he knew we were going to be playing with 3+ people.
Here we are 4 years later.
It's crazy, isn't it? However, as Bruno's saying as well, buying a second copy will result in a lot of cardboard that's just going to sit around. There are some people who have used their extra copies in some of their extra return to boxes, which is pretty sweet. So, for example, you can store like your Ancient Evils in 2 of your return to boxes to make it so that those are what you carry around when you play. And also the other thing is it's kind of just boring to buy your second core set. There's more exciting things to buy in the game, but it's worth it when you really want to play Arkham Horror.
Yeah, it might be a little dull, but it is very strong.
Yes. Another upside to getting your second core set is that once you have your second core set in a full cycle, you'll have all the cards you need to build one of the decks from our Cycle Investigator series that we post on the channel. Yes. You like that self-promotion?
I do. You know what? I'll put that series. I was actually going to make a whole playlist for that, so I'll make a playlist and put it at the end of this video. We're going to move on to starter decks now. So starter decks were a very smart idea by Fantasy Flight Games, and in retrospect, were a complete inevitability. So they provide an Investigator, a deck, and upgrades for that Investigator, and these cards can be added to your collection and provide a great value for their price. So when you're just starting, a lot of people are going to ask, should I get the Investigator starter decks? And honestly, yeah. Like, I wish these were around when we started. Like, they're great for pumping up your collection.
Nice to just have more cards to play with.
Yeah. Like, it's just... Like, the scenarios are fun, but having the options when you build your decks is, like, super exciting. I'm going to talk the pros and cons, and then we can just have an open discussion. So they're a fantastic way to boost your collection, and I believe all the Investigators are pretty simple for new players to play and understand, so they're great for new players. One of them is like just draw cards, and that's easy. The downside of these, if I had to give them one, is pretty simple. They only provide player cards, so if you're looking for scenarios, you'll need to look elsewhere. Any other thoughts you guys want to add?
I think that's like these starter decks do a very good job of supplementing the collection. Not to the point where you don't ever want to buy a second core set, but you could very easily buy a couple of these in the colors that you and your friends like to play, instead of buying the core sets to help supplement your card pool if there are maybe 3 or more of you playing.
Yep, you definitely don't need to buy all of them at once. Like Bryn mentioned, you just buy them for the colors you like playing. You know, if you like playing Seekers, your buddy likes playing Rogues, just pick up the yellow and green ones.
Yep. They're very easy to just buy what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right.
Is it cycle time yet?
Sorry?
Is it cycle time yet?
It's cycle time. So, looking at each cycle, you're probably like, which one do I get? So this video is, we're assuming the perfect world where every cycle is available to you and you can choose what you want. And we're going to recommend each cycle with our own personal pros and cons. Most of our ideologies on these cycles are pretty similar, but we still have 3 different perspectives for each cycle, which I think will be helpful for you getting 3 different voices on what you should look for. As well, at the top of each page, I'm not going to read it out loud, but there is a little description as well, kind of just generally what the theme or like story of that cycle is. So Bryn, we'll start with you for the Dunwich Legacy. This was the first release cycle. What were your pros about if you're going to recommend the Dunwich Legacy? What's there to look for?
So with the Dunwich Legacy, we have the Investigators that come in this box can be built to do pretty much whatever you need them to. You get to play 5 color cards of any color, level 0. It's a very flexible option. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of they work work very well to round out any sort of team, no matter what team, like what your friends want.
Yeah.
You can make them do what you need to do. The player cards in this expansion are also very solid. None of them are particularly flashy or exciting, but if you buy this instead of a second core set, or before you have a second core set, it will expand your card pool to the point that you can likely build decks for everybody without anyone having to suffer too much.
Yeah.
For not getting, somebody else playing a similar color to them or wanting similar cards to them.
Yeah.
My cons for this one are that there aren't very many exciting cards in it. They're very solid, but they're not particularly flashy. And lastly, there are some yellow cards in this cycle that are not very much fun for everybody else to play. If you've never played a game like this before, if you've ever played any kind of role-playing game, it's not a lot of fun when the mage gets to just walk into combat and brawl as well as you do when you've put levels into fighter every chance you got.
Yeah. For mine, a pro for the Dunwich Legacy is that if you had to start with a cycle, this one is probably the difficulty level is the easiest. Because it just came out and they weren't really caring about challenging a card pool. This assumes you have a small card pool, so the difficulty matches that. In addition to what Bryn said, the deck building styles of these investigators is still some of the best in the game, and it works very well for a smaller card pool. My cons for the Dunwich Legacy is that it's a middle of the road in terms of its quality for scenarios. Some of this stuff is just kind of like not as exciting as the things that came out in Future. And that this campaign feels very samey on future playthroughs. When you have a limited collection, you're going to be playing cycles again and again. And Dunwich Legacy doesn't change much from A to B like some of the other ones do. Travis, what about you?
I have that the rules are relatively basic for the campaign, where it's pretty much just an extension of the core set. It builds off of the same examples. There aren't any really paradigm-changing rules or anything like that, like the Explore deck or Haunted mechanic and that stuff. It's got great staples for player cards. There's a lot of just good cards here. And the Investigators, again, just nice and easy to build, especially for new players. You just pick a color, and then you pick your favorite 5 cards from a different color. Easy. Downside to this is this one's relatively difficult to find because lots of people, like we mentioned at the start of the video, people will seem to want you to buy them in the order that they were released for some reason. And so people are always like, oh, you got to get Dunwich Legacy. You got to get the Dunwich Legacy. So it tends to sell pretty quickly once it's reprinted. And as Bryn mentioned, there are some player cards that are kind of game breaking, and they have released fixes to those with something called the taboo list, and which you should look into, but only if those cards are proving to be an issue and affecting your fun in the game. I wouldn't worry about it from a power level standpoint. There's a handful of balance issues with this cycle, where there's scenarios where if you built your deck wrong or picked the wrong investigator, you don't get to play really, comparatively anyway. And that feels bad. Also, if you like green characters, this isn't the cycle for you.
Yeah, that last one I didn't put into mine because I try not to think about it because it causes me physical pain.
Yeah, the dark ages of Arkham.
There's a couple good cards, but in general, if you like green characters and you care about your deck building options, you should look into a different cycle first.
Yeah.
Or at least buy the green starter deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll help a lot.
Yeah. Next up, we got Path to Carcosa. So this was the second cycle released, and we get to fight the Yellow King with a bunch of madness and all that. Bryn, what are your pros and cons for the Path to Carcosa?
All right, so this one, we've got a very, very enjoyable campaign, and it does also have a bit of variability to it, depending on the choices that you make as you play through. This is also the first cycle where we start to see neat player cards where you look at it and you're not sure what exactly it does, if indeed it does anything, and you get to try to figure that out. That is kind of the part of card games that I enjoy most. Downsides to it are the new rules for this one are very difficult to keep track of as you play the scenario. There are a lot of them that will change as you play and stop you from being able to do things, but you also have to be paying attention to like the cards that are in play and what you're allowed to do. It is like kind of difficult. So this one's like, you do probably want a second core set, or at least like, starter decks in the colors of the investigators you want to play before attempting this one.
Yeah.
It will punish you for that.
Which I'll get to in my cons, one that Bryn is very familiar with. My pros of the Path to Carcosa, this is my favorite cycle, and I think the campaign is very thematic with some really fun scenarios. There's only one scenario in the whole cycle I don't like, but all the other ones are really fun. There's also... The investigators are all great. Like I looked through when I was making these slides, and I'm like, dude, all of them are awesome. And the player cards, there's some great stuff in this cycle. The downside of Path to Carcosa is that the early campaign has some player elimination, which can feel bad. For if you're making a deck, you want to play this character, and then your character gets eliminated. Like that can feel bad and turn some people off. In addition, this is going back to the Dunwich Legacy where I said how like the replayability is a bit low. There's more replayability in Path to Carcosa, but some story choices are just wrong to make. So if you're someone who wants to play optimally, you'll never make that choice. To the point that now when we play, we don't choose those choices to make the videos more entertaining because they're more challenging for us. But there are choices that just make it, you don't even have to think about it. Travis, what about you?
Yeah, this one, again, as I mentioned, has a fantastic story. It's a really fun player experience. Anytime we do one of our list videos on, like, when it comes to our favorite scenarios or our favorite story moments or, like, just anything relating to do with the flavor or the story of the campaigns, like, Path to Carcosa crushes it. There's only, like, one cycle that really competes at all. Mm-hmm. It's got good investigators. They got like a nice little bit of variety from the basic 5 of one color, 2 of another that the core set has, and they're just fun investigators to play. None of them are particularly gimmicky or anything like that. So, for player cards, sorry,
except for one of them.
Which one?
Lola.
Oh, I forgot Lola was in this set.
I literally didn't think of Lola. I blocked her out. Whatever. Very strong purple cards. All across cycle, purple cards great. Green, red cards also pretty good. It's the point where green cards start to get good. Downsides to this one are I don't feel like you can really appreciate how cool this cycle is and the story of it is until you're like, this kind of ties into Bryn's comments about the new rules. Like, you have to be pretty comfortable with the rules and like how the game's supposed to play to really appreciate how they've changed the rules and kind of upended things. And I wouldn't recommend this being your first cycle. I would recommend getting literally any of the others and then playing this one second or third or whatever.
Yeah, Travis, just...
downside...
Oh, sorry, just to interrupt before you go on. But when I was making these slides, I asked, because I messaged to just clarify on that, and I think, Trav, that's 100% true. And it's... Some of the real fun thing on this is kind of like the meta breaking that this does in its scenario structure and the story it tells. And it's totally true. This is probably a better experience. You'll see some of those kind of like twists if it's not your first campaign. Sorry, Travis. I just agree 100%.
Every Arkham player's first run of the Path to Carcosa, it really is something special, and it's something you should savor.
Yeah.
The last story, this one's not necessarily a negative point, but the blue cards, and there's a couple really good blue cards in this cycle, and then other than those couple of cards, the rest of the blue cards are like pretty not great. So.
All right. Let's move on to the Forgotten Age. In this one, we venture into the jungle, and there's snakes. And I'm excited, Bryn, because Bryn's answers are very Bryn. It makes me laugh. Bryn, what are your pros and cons?
So for pros, we've got this campaign is quite difficult. This is something that I personally enjoy. if the game's not challenging me, why the hell am I playing a cooperative game? I might as well be like, cheating, I guess. Whatever, it doesn't matter.
It's for the social experience.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, like, but we could be doing literally anything else if the game isn't difficult. The campaign has some very cool and unique scenarios to it, which, like, I'm not going to talk about what they are or why they're unique, because that would ruin the effect.
Mm-hmm.
The downsides to this one is very difficult. Like, there are many scenarios where you're like, okay, we're in a massive hole, we could probably dig our way out of this, and the game's like, that's cool, you're poisoned and one of you is dead. You're like, oh, that's neat, I guess.
Cool. Oh yeah, so campaign spoilers, being poisoned is bad.
Yeah.
So, yes, so like it is maybe a little harder than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
It also requires like a butt ton of bookkeeping. Like, not just the same as normal where you got to make notes on your campaign log, but you also got to keep track of like 100 other things, and they're important when you're playing, but like, maybe you got to dig out the campaign log every time that you move into a new location. And keep track of a whole lot of things that don't really feel that much fun.
Yeah, it feels like that sometimes.
Yeah.
So my first pro sounds like a con, and it is, but it's like, it's one of those things, kind of like Bryn, where how like the very difficult is good and bad. This is a campaign that punches you like 8 times in the face in an interlude between scenarios. But that also, like, if you're looking for something difficult, like if you've played through, for example, like Dream Eaters, and you're like, I'm ready for something more, and you want something hard, Forgotten Age is worth the time for that. The difficulty is really kind of like exciting, and it's like, it feels a little bit more stressful than all the other campaigns combined, really. And it's very unique to the feeling of the Forgotten Age. With that note, the highs in this campaign are very high. The fun and unique scenarios that Bryn's talking about, like, they're some of the best in the game. With the cons, though, the lows in this campaign are very, very low. Like, this has my least favorite scenario in the entire game, and it's like easily there on the bottom. So it's just one of those things that you're gonna have to trudge through some junk to get the exciting stuff. The explore mechanic, which is big throughout the whole thing, as it is printed, as it is made in the deluxe box, is bad. If you've played through this and you want to play it with the rules that are in the return to box, you can find them online. The return to explore mechanic is good. I actually do like it, and I think it makes more sense than how it was printed in the box. And to me, the investigators aren't as exciting in this cycle. It has some of the ones that are just like Matteo and Leo. They're not bad, but they're just not exciting, right? They're just kind of like, especially with Father Matteo.
With Innsmouth Conspiracy, though.
Pardon?
Matteo's getting a big boost with Innsmouth Conspiracy.
And like, that's the thing, like Matteo in this cycle, his options are very limited, which is kind of what makes him not as exciting. I'm very excited for future Matteo, but like when you're looking at just a cycle, that would be one of my cons for it. Travis, what are yours?
Indiana Jones flavor for this cycle is like very accessible. You can just tell people like, hey, you want to play Arkham, it's like Indiana Jones, and they'll be like, I like Indiana Jones. Harrison Ford is a babe. Can I play him? And you'll be like, if you have Carcosa, then yes, you can. But this is like the first cycle that I found that really branched off and started like focusing on putting cards in each cycle that support archetypes. The really noble one here is like the purple ceiling archetype, and it makes for some cool deck building decisions. Blue cards in this cycle, great. Downsides, it's hard. They told you why. A lot of the investigators require large card pools to be effective. Particularly Calvin Wright. He's really, really good if you have if you have the cards to play him, but not a lot of those cards come in this cycle. Same thing with Father Matteo. Like, he's a pretty neat investigator, but I mean, like, if you're buying the Innsmouth Conspiracy, like, go ahead and pick this one up too, because he's getting a lot of support in that, and I expect that our complaints about him will kind of be assuaged by the newest cycle. But
yeah, definitely.
And like Leo even is like pretty so without some of the allies and like ally supporting cards from other cycles, like especially Charisma from the Dunwich Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And then one thing that's actually not written here, but as something that I've had that Justin kind of touched on, and Bryn as well. As a person who does most of the bookkeeping and set for new scenarios, setting up this campaign sucks. Every time you're setting up a scenario, you're like, oh god, I have to do 20 things. Which is a pain, but for most of the scenarios, it's worth it. Yeah. Like, it is a good overall. Like, I'm not gonna tell you shouldn't buy this one. It's a fun experience. It's just you should know what you're getting into.
Yeah, for sure. All right, and then after the Forgotten Age, there was the Circle Undone, where we stay in Arkham the whole time and talk about ghosts and ghouls. Bryn, what are your pros and cons for the Circle Undone?
Oh, okay. Well, we got a lot of very cool player cards in this cycle that do things that haven't really been done in their colors before, that you can also use. Like, they're not so narrow that only the Investigator that came in the cycle would ever want them. So I think that's pretty cool. This campaign has, like, I don't have much good to say about this one. Like, this campaign, there's a story there. It just feels like they're not really telling it to you.
Yeah.
Unless you make, like, the correct choices at certain junctures. So that being said, to me, this is like the most forgettable one.
Mm-hmm.
It's got cool cards in it. The player cards in this one are sweet. The investigators from this one are really cool.
But it just it lacks that.
Just like this, the story just feels like feels a little wrong, you know.
Yeah.
Like it's not connected, and they're trying to tell you 3 or 4 different stories all at the same time. And if you make the wrong choices, you don't get the complete part of any of them.
Yeah. For me, the mood of the story is good, and by that I mean like the whole theme of the ghosts and like the Arkham's past and the curses is really apparent, and you kind of just feel it in like the tone of the adventure. It doesn't mean that like the scenarios themselves are good because of it, but it just like the vibe of it feels a bit gloomier than the other scenarios. As well, staying in Arkham for the first cycle, like first full cycle, is awesome. That's a nice change. As well, the final scenario is really strong in the sense that like, so Arkham Horror Files games, they're all about getting the junk beat out of you and like just getting punched in the face while being like having that hope that we can do it. Arkham Horror the card game, because it's a story game, has less of that, but the final scenario of this one is like the one scenario in this game that truly does feel like you're playing an Arkham Horror Files game, because
it's like strong in the sense that it'll pick you and all your teammates up and put you all in the trash.
Yeah. And like I think it's like one of the biggest successes in the game, and I think its rendition of its final boss is like my favorite in all of it. It just, the whole thing works really well for the final scenario. However, for my cons, the scenario themselves are more meh than good. We are currently playing through this cycle again on our channel, and I'm just not having a good time. It might be because of our playthrough is a joke playthrough where we're all purple, but at the same time, the scenarios are pretty boring in this one, apart from like two and a half standouts. I like the one of the other scenarios. And as what Bryn was saying, you don't really feel like you're having an effect on the story in this one. You're kind of watching a clip show of someone else, of other people doing things, and you're kind of just nodding there going like, I've done it. And if you put a gun to my head and asked me to explain how we got to the situation in the final scenario, I could not explain it to you, and you would have to kill me because I don't remember. There's just I can explain every other adventure except this one. I don't know how that guy connects to the story. Travis, what do you got?
I actually think that this campaign has a really cool story. It requires a little bit more knowledge of the Arkham mythos to kind of get some of the connections that they make, which apparently I've never explained to you guys. And contrary to what you guys have said, I'm going to be the center here. I actually really like this sort of disconnect in the story. I think it does a very good job of embodying a big part of what Lovecraft's works are about and the Cthulhu mythos in general, where a big part of it is instilling the feeling in the reader or in the the person who's enjoying the media that a lot of very important events are entirely luck based and that you're kind of impotent. Like, you can try to push them one way or the other, but sometimes it doesn't work out. And that's a big part of the Lovecraft stories are humanity they're identifying how the fear of how small and insignificant humans really are. I think this campaign does the story does a fantastic job of that. Again, great player cards, great investigators, lots of fun stuff in this. Lots of fun options in this deluxe box. A couple new cool archetypes, some nice staple cards for several colors. Player cards would highly recommend. Mm-hmm. Downside, campaign's actually pretty difficult, especially that last scenario. It'll
and scenario 2, hey?
Yeah,
scenario 2 is pretty brutal on this one.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, this campaign has some meta encounters. There's a couple that are fairly a little bit samey. I do think that this campaign has more high points that my co-hosts here are giving it credit for. There's a couple of memorable scenarios that we've had a good time playing, but overall, it's on the weaker side of the campaign stuff.
Yeah. All right, the final campaign we got to talk about today, is the Dream Eaters. Before we get to the Dream Eaters, we're not talking about the Innsmouth Conspiracy in this buy guide because it has not been fully released. However, as we stated earlier, buying the cycles as they're released is a good way to keep up with the game. So if Innsmouth Conspiracy is still being released at the time of watching, hop in there. And if a new cycle is being released, hop in there. It's a good way to keep up with the game. And the Dreamlands...
One suggestion I have for that is, for keeping up if you want the newest stuff, is there's a couple online stores that offer a subscription service where every time a new pack comes out, they just charge it and send it to you. That's what I've been using since this game came out, and I've never missed a pack.
Yeah. All right. So in this one, we get to explore the Dreamlands, which is a nice, fun place. Bryn, what are your pros and cons for the Dream Eaters?
All right. So pros for this one is that I'm glad that they chose to explore a different campaign structure. Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. Instead of being one 8-part story, it's two smaller 4-part stories that are meant to be played interlaced with each other. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of neat. The flavor of everything you do, the way that what you're doing relates to the lore of the place you're in. That's a smash hit in this one. It's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Downsides to it are that because there are 2 4-part mini campaigns, you need twice as many decks constructed, or to deconstruct your decks in between so that you can build one for the other side.
Yeah,
which is just it's a little tough if you only have a single collection.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, not undoable, but it means that you gotta make deck lists and keep track of everything. It's just a little bit more work.
Just spend $200 on Dragon Shields and and sleeve your entire collection, all your player cards. That was a joke. Don't do that.
Yeah, that would be a lot. That would be a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
My pros for the Dream Eater cycle is the flavor. Holy hell. The flavor of this campaign is incredible. It's the best. Like, I'm a big Haster fanboy, but I think the flavor of this one excels Path to Carcosa. Like, it's so juicy. This one's great. The investigators in the box are also powerful and very fun. And all the scenarios actually have something good going for them. There's only one scenario in this cycle I don't enjoy playing, but it's still a good time in terms of its flavor, right? It's the mechanics and like the process I don't like, but all the scenarios, they're enough to get like a thumbs up for me for this one, which is, I think, the only cycle that has that for me personally. And as Bryn is saying, the campaign style has a different structure, and while it was a unique experiment, I don't like it. I think it's good that they're experimenting with it, but it's just, I feel like I'm not playing. I'd rather play one deck. I only get to play a deck 4 times. I like being able to play a deck 8 times. It's a bit more exciting to me. The increase that you get your power is the same, even a bit higher in Dream Eaters probably. It goes a bit quicker. But I like the experience of being with an investigator and like giving them love over 8 scenarios. That just, this is a bit lower for me on that. As well, some of the aspects of it aren't balanced for lower player counts, especially when it comes to the final, some of the final scenarios, which is a big problem if you're going to be playing solo especially. But if you're playing 3 or more players, it's not a problem at all. It's easy peasy. Travis, what about you?
Yeah, as the others mentioned, this one, all scenarios are fun. The story for it is basically, it's basically the search for unknown Kadath story, like part for part, but really just knocks out of the park. I mentioned earlier, there's only one other campaign that comes close and competes with the Path to Carcosa for flavor and for like gameplay experience, and this one's it. And it doesn't just compete like in a lot of places; it actually beats it, as we've discovered with our fairly recent more recent list videos. As a whole, just good cards and investigators. Nothing like that really blows the doors off, but like Tom Muldoon's a fun, easy to gawk investigator. Manny Thompson, very powerful, very fun to play. Patrice is a little bit difficult to build, especially with only like 1 core set and 1 cycle and the Dream Eater cycle, but she's very unique. You'll have a good time trying to make her work. Tori Morgan, just a nice monster killer again. Pretty much an upgrade in a lot of ways to Skids from the core set. Luke Robinson, just like, man, he's one of my favorite characters to play. He's an absolute blast. And then, yeah, my only downside for this one is the campaign structure is a little bit weird. They pretty much covered all the points I have about it. Yeah, I don't really have too much more to say on that.
Sweet. Well, that's it. We've gone through all of those. We're going to release a video in the future talking specifically in detail cycle from pack to pack, if you look what you would want to pick up each pack for and all that. In addition, we're going to also do a video on the return to boxes and standalone scenarios in the future. But rather than talk like for 90 minutes, which would have done all that, we are doing this nice little bite-sized, which are going to be the most common products new players are going to get, which are cycles, core sets, and investigator starter decks. Thanks for watching, everybody. You guys have a good one. And as always, GG's.